Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking aim at something so fundamental, so deeply ingrained, that you probably don't even think of it as a belief. We're talking about the simple object.
It really is the bedrock of common sense, isn't it? It's this perception we have before we even learn to talk. You look at your desk, you see a pen, a phone, a coffee mug.
Right, and the feeling, this really powerful, intuitive feeling, is that these things are just there. They're independent, self-contained little units of reality.
Philosophers have a few names for this. You could call it naive realism or atomism. It's the belief that the world is built up from these basic, self-sufficient things in themselves.
And that assumption goes deep. I mean, you feel that if everything else in the universe vanished, the air, the light, other people, all of it, that coffee mug on your desk would still be a coffee mug.
Exactly. It wouldn't suddenly transform into an elephant or the square root of 2. It has its own identity, its own properties, locked inside itself.
Well, that's the intuition we're going to dismantle today.
Yeah.
Our deep dive is into this really revolutionary counter-thesis, an idea that's shared by some of the most important thinkers from the last couple of centuries.
And what's so fascinating is how different their starting points are. They all land on the same conclusion. What an object is depends entirely, fundamentally, on its context.
So our mission today is to show you that the simplicity of that coffee mug is, well, it's an illusion. Its being, its meaning, its very existence as something you can understand relies on a vast, hidden system.
A context that can be structural, social, functional, you name it. And the lineup of thinkers we have is just incredible. We're starting with Edmund Husserl, who defines context as the internal structure of our own consciousness, what he calls the horizon.
Then we make this huge leap over to Ludwig Wittgenstein. He actually started out looking for simple objects, failed, and then defined context as a public, rule-governed social activity, the language game.
After that, we'll bring it right up to the present with the cognitive scientist Daniel Dennett. He attacks the idea of simple, private feelings, or qualia, by arguing that consciousness is embedded in a context of functional and physical dispositions.
And we finish with the big one, G.W.F. Hegel. For him, context is this radical idea of active negation, the idea that the identity of a positive thing is actually built out of everything it isn't.
So by unpacking the logical reasoning behind each of these four, we want to show you how that idea of a simple atomic thing just dissolves under pressure, and how context is really the engine that makes knowledge possible.
Okay, let's dive in. We're starting with Edmund Husserl, the founder of Phenomenology. Now, when we say context, Husserl is coming at this from the most basic level imaginable, the structure of experience itself.
Yes, that's his whole project. He's a foundationalist. He wanted to put philosophy, and science too, on an absolutely unshakable footing.
Not based on theories about atoms or neurons or anything like that.
Exactly. No theories. His big rule is bracket all outside theories. Forget what physics tells you. Forget what common sense tells you. Just describe the experience, the phenomenon, solely as it appears to you.
That seems almost impossible to do.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you stop interpreting? If I look at this microphone in front of me, I don't see, like, a patch of black and silver sense data. I immediately see a microphone, which is already a loaded functional concept.
And Husserl would say you're absolutely right. We never experience the world as a chaos of raw sense data, the way an empiricist philosopher like David Hume might have suggested.
So what do we experience?
We experience whole objects. Let's take his example, a simple wooden table. When you look at it, you don't see floating patches of brown. You experience a solid, substantial, three-dimensional object. And this is where the context immediately and necessarily comes into play.
Okay, so I'm looking at a table. I'm only ever explicitly seeing one side of it, right? The top surface, the front two legs, maybe. But I am absolutely 100% convinced, without even thinking about it, that the table has a backside. It has an underside.
That conviction is the crucial point. Husserl says that if the object didn't have an other side, if it was just a flat, two-dimensional movie set prop, it wouldn't be a physical object in the way we experience one.
Even the movie prop would have a back, no matter how thin. It would just be unpainted plywood or something.
Exactly. The structural necessity that a physical thing must have multiple sides, more than what's presented at any one moment, is what Husserl calls the regional essence of physical reality.
So the object I explicitly see, the part that's in focus, requires the necessary existence of all the parts I don't explicitly see.
Precisely. And he has a technical term for this relationship. He calls it adumbration. It's a bit of a strange word, but it means the actually experienced side, the explicit part, sort of shades out or points toward the potentially experienced sides.
Okay, shades out. That's a bit tricky. Is this other side just something I'm imagining? Is it my memory filling in the blanks because I've seen tables before?
No, and this is the vital distinction that makes this phenomenology, not psychology. It is not your imagination or your memory. When you look at the table, you are experiencing the object as a whole right now, but you're experiencing the other side in a different mode.
A different mode.
The mode of potentiality. It's there, co-present in your experience, but as a potential.
A potential for me to
What?
to go and look at it.
Yes, that potentiality refers to your inherent embodied capacity to convert that implicit experience into an explicit one. By walking around the table, by tilting your head, by reaching under it. If you tried to walk around it and found nothing there, if it really was just a facade, the entire sense of your original experience would shatter.
It would cease to be a table.
Yeah.
The whole experience would collapse into what on earth was that?
The object's very identity as a physical thing is completely bound up in that context of potential actions and perceptions.
It's fascinating. The context isn't something external, like a label. The context that defines the object is literally the surrounding field of my possible experience.
Yeah.
And Husserl claims we know this relationship is necessary. He says we have eidetic intuition of it.
Eidetic intuition. Sounds complicated.
It just means we can grasp the essential structure of a thing with absolute certainty, just like we grasp that 2 + 2 = 4. You don't need to go and test a million tables to prove they all have other sides.
You just see that the very concept of a physical object given in vision demands other-sidedness.
It's an a priori certainty about the structure of experience itself. The object is fundamentally relational from the get-go.
Okay, so that's for physical objects. Their essential context is this spatial potentiality. But what about other kinds of things? What about numbers or ideas?
Great question. And that leads to his idea of regional essence. Different kinds of phenomena belong to different regions, and each region has its own set of necessary features, its own kind of context.
Let's take the region of mathematics. If I think about the number 7, not the written numeral, but the concept, it is an essential necessity of 7 that it does not have a physical backside.
Right. That property is completely excluded from the essence of what a number is. But the number 7 is still not an isolated atom. It still requires a context to be intelligible.
You can't grasp 7 in total isolation.
Never. You can only grasp it against an implied background, a horizon of the entire system of natural numbers. 7's meaning, its sin, as Husserl would say, is determined by its position relative to 6 and 8 and 14, and the rules of addition, multiplication, and so on.
Take away that system and the concept 7 just becomes a meaningless sound.
It completely loses its sense. So for a physical object, the context is spatial potential. For a number, the context is systemic potential, its relationship to all the other numbers and rules.
And this lets us understand why some sentences are just nonsense.
Exactly. We can intuit the boundaries between these regions. You know immediately that the statement, the square root of an apple is blue, is gibberish. Not false, just nonsensical.
Because it's mixing categories. It's violating the structural necessities. Apples don't have square roots, and mathematical concepts don't have colors.
So every single object of consciousness, whether it's a table, a number, a memory, an emotion, it always has an explicit focus set against this vast implicit background. And that background is its horizon or its regional essence.
That horizon is the context. It's what gives the object its meaning. You mentioned Frege. This sounds a lot like his idea that a word only has meaning in the context of a sentence.
It's a very close parallel, but Husserl is making a much bigger claim. He's saying this is true not just for language, but for all possible experience.
He takes it one step further, doesn't he? He argues that every specific horizon, every regional essence, ultimately depends on what he calls the horizon of all horizons.
Which is the general possibility of any sense or meaning whatsoever. He sometimes calls this the world or transcendental subjectivity, the ultimate context.
So the big takeaway from Husserl is that the perceived self-sufficiency of an object is basically an illusion of our attention. The table seems simple and self-contained because we're just focusing on the explicit bit.
While completely ignoring the vast necessary relational structure, the context that's actually holding the whole experience together and making it intelligible in the first place, no object is ever given by itself.
Wow. Okay, that's a powerful argument, all rooted in the deep structure of consciousness. Now let's make a pretty radical pivot. We're moving from the internal, private structure of perception to the external, public structure of language and social rules. we're moving to Ludwig Wittgenstein.
And this shift is just monumental, not least because Wittgenstein himself performed it in his own career. His early book, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, was, ironically, this grand attempt to achieve the ultimate philosophical atomism.
So he was on the other side of this argument at first. He was looking for the simple objects.
He was trying to do something a bit like Kant. He wanted to map out the absolute limits of language and thought, to figure out the necessary conditions for any statement to be clearly and truly meaningful.
And that's what led him to the idea of simple objects. Why were they so logically necessary for him?
Because the whole project was about achieving determinate sense, absolute clarity. For any proposition, a judgment like the cat is on the mat, to be true, it has to correspond to a fact in the world.
Okay, that makes sense.
But for the proposition to be unambiguously meaningful, the names in it, cat, mat, must ultimately refer to absolutely simple objects.
Why simple? What's wrong with a complex object like a chair?
Well, if a chair is complex, it means it has parts, right? Legs, a seat, a back. The existence of the chair is contingent on all those parts being arranged in that specific way.
So the word chair isn't secure. Its meaning depends on the truth of another proposition.
Exactly. The meaning of chair would depend on the truth of the four legs are attached to the seat in this way, and so on. The meaning of the parts' names would depend on propositions about their parts, and you get stuck in this infinite regress where meaning is never pinned down, it just dissolves.
I see. So to stop that regress and get to a solid foundation for truth, he reasoned that language must eventually bottom out in simple names that point to simple objects.
Objects with no parts whose existence would be necessary. They would be the very substance of the world.
So this simple object wasn't something he found in the world. It was a purely logical requirement for language to work the way he thought it had to.
It was, and that became the great agonizing paradox that ultimately led him to abandon the whole project of the Tractatus. Because Wittgenstein, just like Plato 2,000 years earlier, could not point to a single actual example of a logically simple object.
Not even, say, a chemical atom?
Nope. A chemical atom has protons, neutrons, electrons. It's composite. What about a Humean sense datum, like a single point of red color? Well, that can be analyzed into properties like hue, brightness, saturation. Still composite.
So the simple object was a ghost, a logical necessity with no reality.
And that failure is what sparks his massive turn, which he documents years later in his second great book, The Philosophical Investigations.
Where he basically argues against his former self.
Completely. He rejects the entire referential model of language. He realizes that simplicity isn't some absolute metaphysical property of the world. It's entirely relative to our context and our purpose.
Let's use an example. If I ask, what are the simple parts of a chair?
A carpenter might say, the legs, the seat, the back. A chemist might say, polymers of wood cellulose. A physicist would say, quarks and leptons. Who is right?
They all are, depending on the context of the question.
Precisely. Simple and composite are not features of the chair itself. They are features of the language game we are playing when we ask the question.
And this insight just demolishes the idea that meaning starts with pointing at a simple thing and giving it a name.
It destroys it. This idea of ostensive definition, just pointing and naming, he shows, is fundamentally ambiguous. If I point at your phone and I say, that is a glowy, what do I mean?
You could mean the object, the brand, the color, the shape, the category of communication devices. I'd have no idea.
You'd have no idea unless you already understood the rules of the naming game we were playing. Ostensive definition only works if the role of the word is already clear. You can only define king in chess by pointing at the piece if your student already understands the general rules of chess up to that point.
And this is the core of his famous language game metaphor. The context that provides clarity and meaning isn't some hidden logical structure. It's a public, social, rule-governed system of use.
Think about that chess king. As a physical object, it's just a piece of carved wood or molded plastic. To someone who has never heard of chess, it's meaningless.
But within the language game of chess, it suddenly gains this incredibly rich, determinate identity.
It becomes the piece that can move one square in any direction, the piece that can't move into check, the piece whose capture ends the game. Its entire being as a king is given to it by the system of rules.
So it's not just the word king, it's the object itself that only has its being within the game. Outside that context, its identity as the king evaporates.
That is the crux of Wittgenstein's contextualism. What something is, its determinacy, requires this social, rule-governed context.
And this reliance on public rules leads to what is probably his most famous and challenging argument. The impossibility of a private language.
Right. If meaning is based on following rules, he argues those rules cannot be purely private, existing only in one person's mind.
Why not? Let's say I invent a word, S, for a specific unique sensation I sometimes have. Only I can know it. I resolve to use S every time I have that sensation. Am I not following a rule?
Wittgenstein's question is, how would you know? Tomorrow you have a sensation, you think, this is S, but how can you be sure you're remembering the rule correctly? How do you check?
And there's no external standard. There would be no difference between me following the rule correctly and me just think I'm following the rule correctly.
And if there's no difference, then the concept of correct has no meaning. He says such a rule would be unpolliciable. If it's unpolliciable, there's no distinction between following the rule and acting randomly. Therefore, there is no rule and there is no meaning.
So for a rule to be a rule, there must be a public, shared practice. There has to be a community that can, in principle, correct you.
Meaning must be public. And so the objects defined by that meaning are also constituted by the public social context of the community.
It's amazing. Whether we're looking at the internal structure of perception with Husserl or the external structure of social agreement with Wittgenstein, the conclusion is the same. The simple, isolated object is an illusion, defined only by the complex system it lives in.
Okay, we've gone from the internal structure of perception and the external structure of language. Now let's pivot again, this time into the body, the brain, and the world of modern cognitive science with Dennett.
Dennett's target is very, very specific, but his conclusion is going to sound familiar. He's launching an all-out assault on the idea that our consciousness is made up of absolutely simple, intrinsic little bits of feeling. These are often called qualia.
Yes, his opponents are the qualiphiles, as he calls them. These are philosophers and thinkers who insist that there is a pure, private, simple, ineffable, subjective feeling at the heart of experience.
Things like the unique redness of red or the specific taste of a good cup of coffee. It's the what it's like of an experience.
Exactly. And the qualiphiles argue that this is the essential characteristic of consciousness. It's the thing a computer or a robot could never have, even if it performed all the same functions.
This is the philosophical zombie argument, isn't it? The idea that you could have a perfect replica of a human that talks about red, stops at red lights, everything, but inside it's just dark. There's no actual experience of redness.
That's the one. The quail is that supposed intrinsic, simple content that makes consciousness conscious. And the classic thought experiment designed to isolate this simple quail is the inverted spectrum scenario.
Okay, let's walk through that one carefully. The idea is, imagine my brain is wired differently from yours. When I look at a ripe tomato, the wavelength of light triggers in me the subjective experience that you call green.
Right, and when you look at fresh grass, you experience what you call green, but for me, that same wavelength triggers the experience I privately call red.
But, and this is the critical part, we both grew up in the same world. We both learned to use the word red for tomatoes and fire engines and green for grass and leaves. So our external behavior and language are perfectly identical.
Our outputs are aligned. We pass every color blindness test. We'd agree on which paintings are beautiful. But the qualifiable intuition says that deep down that simple intrinsic feeling, the quail, is different. It can vary independently of our function.
And Dennett's response is that this thought experiment is basically a cheat. It's fundamentally incomplete and misleading.
He says to truly isolate the simple quail, to prove it's independent, you can't just stop there. You have to imagine removing all the functional baggage that comes along with that sensation.
So it's not enough just to swap the input circuits. If an evil neurosurgeon does this to me, so I now see green where I used to see red, she can't stop there.
For the experiment to be valid, she must also go in and swap all the output circuits and downstream effects associated with that color.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, think about all the subtle associations red has. For many people, it's a color of alarm or passion or stopping. Green is often associated with nature, calm, or go. If my original red experience made me feel slightly more alert, then after the surgery, my new phenomenal green experience must also make me feel slightly more alert.
So even though I'm seeing what you call green, it has to trigger all the specific functional roles that red used to trigger. If seeing red blood used to trigger patriotic memories, now seeing the green blood must trigger those same memories.
Precisely. And Dennett thinks that once you complete the thought experiment this way, the whole idea of an independent quale falls apart. We can't even imagine what it would be like for that inner feeling to exist in a total functional vacuum.
He has an even more powerful version of this, a reductio ad absurdum, using pain and pleasure. I think this really makes the point hit home.
Let's guide everyone through this one because it's a real mind bender. Imagine the neurosurgeon doesn't swap your color circuits. She swaps your pain and pleasure circuits. So now, when you take a bite of your favorite food, let's say a delicious piece of chocolate cake, the physical input travels up and activates the brain areas associated with intense physical pain. It produces a sharp, nasty, aversive, subjective quale.
And here's the Dennett twist, we leave all the downstream functional consequences exactly as they were.
Right. So despite this horrible, painful, subjective feeling, your external behavior remains positive. You smile, you eagerly reach for a second slice, you say out loud, wow, this is the best cake I've ever had.
And it's not just my outward behavior. My internal judgments are the same too. I'm anticipating the next bite with pleasure. My memory will encode this as a wonderful experience. My endocrine system releases dopamine.
While all along, this supposedly simple, pure, painful feeling is just sitting there, completely disconnected from all the things that we associate with pain. No aversion, no desire for it to stop, no negative judgment.
You hit a conceptual wall. If you subtract every aversive reaction, every motivation to avoid, every memory of suffering, what is left of pain?
Dennett's answer is nothing. Your imagination draws a complete blank. The concept of pain, just like redness, is constituted by the entire complex network of our responses to it.
So the simple private givenness of consciousness, the isolated quale, is an illusion. It's a mistake we make when we introspect. The experience of redness isn't some atomic feeling pixel.
It's a vast web of internal and external dispositions. The context is functional and pragmatic. The light hits your eye, your nervous system discriminates its properties, and that discrimination immediately kicks off a huge cascade of mental, behavioral, and physiological capacities. The experience is the activation of that whole complex system.
That's a stunning parallel to Husserl. Husserl threw out Hume's simple sense data by showing perception needs a context of potentiality, the horizon. Dennett throws out Qualia by showing sensation needs a functional context, the dispositional network.
And both land on the same conclusion. What seems simple is just the momentary focus on a single part of a vastly complex relational whole.
All right. We've seen context as subjective structure, as social rules, and as functional capacities. Now we have to turn to our final thinker, G.W.F. Hegel, whose contextualism might be the most profound and maybe the most difficult of all. It operates on the level of pure logic and identity.
It is definitely the most radical. Hegel's core claim is that the simple, positive identity of a thing, a statement like, the ball is red, is, when taken in isolation, completely meaningless. It's an illusion.
For Hegel, the positive identity of an object is actually built out of what it is not.
This is his famous or infamous idea of determinate negation. And to get our heads around this, we absolutely have to distinguish the kind of negation Hegel uses from the one we're used to in modern logic.
Okay, let's stick with the red ball example. How would modern logic handle negation here?
Modern logic uses propositional negation. You take the whole sentence, the ball is red, and you negate its truth value. You say, it is false that the ball is red.
Which doesn't tell me what color the ball actually is. It could be blue, green, or colorless. It tells me the original statement was wrong.
Exactly. It's a formal contradiction. But Hegel is using something older, a type of term negation that goes back to Aristotle. Here, you don't negate the whole sentence, you negate the predicate. You say, the ball is non-red.
And that's a positive assertion. It's telling me the ball has a property, the property of being a color that isn't red. It has to be blue or green or yellow.
And that's where identity is forged. The simple positive statement, the ball is red, is just a placeholder. It doesn't mean anything until you place it in opposition to its conceptual field. The meaning of red is derived from the fact that it actively excludes the other predicates in the same category.
So the true full meaning of red is actually the complex negative statement. It is non-blue and non-green and non-yellow and non-purple and so on.
Yes. The positive identity of red is the sum total of its specific determinate negations. The key word there is determinate. The negation has to be specific and belong to the right category.
Can you unpack that a bit more? Why determinate?
Because the context defines the boundaries of relevance. Being red specifically negates other colors. Blue is a contrary of red. But redness does not negate other kinds of properties. like shape or texture.
Saying the ball is red doesn't commit me to saying it is non-square.
Exactly, because squareness isn't in the same conceptual field. It's not a contrary of redness. The concept red only gets its sharp definition, its identity, by being set against the specific array of other possible colors it excludes.
So the moment you identify an object, you are implicitly invoking the entire conceptual scheme to which it belongs. You're invoking the whole range of alternative possibilities that this object is not.
That conceptual scheme is the necessary context. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine a universe that was, from top to bottom, monochromatically red. Every star, every planet, every object was the exact same shade of red.
In a world like that, the concept of red couldn't even be formed. It would just be what it is to exist. Being would be red.
To even have the thought, this is red, you need to have a conceptual space for non-red. Being determinately red requires the actual or possible existence of other determinately non-red things.
So for Hegel, the immediate simple givenness of the red ball is a kind of illusion. It's conceptually superficial, the tip of the iceberg.
It's true, meaning its full reality is only grasped when we move beyond that simple starting point and understand the underlying process of negation that gives it its borders and its identity. This is the dialectical movement.
And this entire structure isn't just an abstract system of logic. It's fundamentally normative. It has a should built into it.
Absolutely. If you look at a red ball and you call it yellow, that's not just a factual mistake, it's a conceptual error. You are misapplying the rules. You're violating the accepted boundaries of the concepts red and yellow within the scheme of color.
That's a normative judgment, a judgment about how concepts should be used. So where does the authority for that should come from? If it's not in the object itself, where is it?
For Hegel, just like for Wittgenstein, it comes from the community. The conceptual boundaries, the rules of the game, the very system of determinate negation are created and upheld through the process of reciprocal recognition among subjects.
We mutually grant each other the authority to hold one another to these shared norms.
Yes. The rules that define red are not my private rules, nor are they baked into the physics of light. They are the result of a shared, public, learned practice.
So Hegel offers this incredible synthesis. The object's identity is defined by the conceptual rules of a system of negation, and those rules are upheld by a social structure of community norms. The ultimate context is the collective project of making sense of the world together.
Across all four of these very different thinkers, the conclusion is just inescapable. Atomism, the idea of a simple, self-sufficient object, is experientially, linguistically, functionally, and logically impossible. Complexity and relationship always come first.
So let's try to bring this all together. We have just taken a journey through four incredibly different philosophical worlds: phenomenology, language, cognitive science, and idealism. And the convergence on this one core point is just stunning.
It really is. They all reject the simple object and insist that what a thing is, its meaning, its being, its experience, is constituted by its necessary context. It's a powerful, unified argument for holism over atomism.
So let's recap the four contexts. With Husserl, the context is the essence or horizon. An object's meaning is built from the internal, necessary structure of perception itself, that essential potential to move from the implicit to the explicit. The context is the field of possible experience.
Then with Wittgenstein, the context is the language game. The object, like the chess king, gets its determinate identity from its role in a public, rule-governed social system of use. Private meaning is impossible. Context is social practice.
Moving to Dennett, the context is the network of functional dispositions. The experience of redness isn't a simple private atom of feeling. It is the activation of a complex web of physical, mental, and behavioral capacities. The context is the object's role in a living system.
And finally, with Hegel, the context is determinate negation. An object's positive identity is fundamentally structured by the system of its contraries, all the things it specifically is not, and by the community norms that police those conceptual boundaries.
What's so compelling is that it's not just an abstract philosophical point. It works whether you're coming from the inside out or the outside in, whether you ask what must be true for me to perceive something,
Or what must be true for us to communicate about it.
or what must be true for our brains to even process it. In every case, what looks like a simple starting point turns out to be a complex result.
The common sense view of the self-sufficient object is just a habit of attention. We focus on the explicit thing in front of us, and we ignore the vast web of structural necessities, functional potentials, conceptual oppositions, and social agreements that are actually holding it in place and making it what it is.
Okay, this entire deep dive has used fairly simple examples, tables, colors, chess pieces. But the implications of this convergence, they stretch far, far beyond inanimate objects. They force us to ask the same question about the most complex concept we know, the self.
Right. If the simple positive identity of a physical object turns out to be an illusion, if its reality is totally dependent on its context, its negations, its role in a system.
I mean, what does that mean for our own identity, for our selfhood, for that deeply cherished modern idea of the isolated individual atomic ego?
If the self were truly an atom, its existence wouldn't be contingent on anything else. But our sense of who we are is so clearly shaped by the social roles we play, our language games, as Wittgenstein would say.
It's shaped by the narratives and memories we functionally activate, which sounds a lot like Dennett, and by the unique first-person structure of our own lived experience, which is Husserl's point.
And maybe most critically, by the concepts and norms we define ourselves against, the things we are not. That's Hegel's determinate negation applied to identity. I am a parent by not being a non-parent. I am a citizen of this country by not being a citizen of that one.
This powerful contextualist argument really suggests that the idea of a self-sufficient atomic individual might also be a powerful persistent illusion. That to truly understand what you are, you have to first understand the systems you're a part of, the things you are not, and the community that recognizes you and gives you meaning.
That is a challenging thought, isn't it? If you aren't an isolated entity but a dynamic node in a vast, necessary context, then your potential isn't found by digging deeper inside yourself, but by looking outward at the relationships you build and the systems you sustain. Definitely something to think about.